Van Dessel entered the restaurant as he always did, quietly, without drawing attention to himself. The staff, busy with their duties, paid him no mind. The evening rush was in full swing, with orders flying back and forth and plates being served. But tonight something felt off. The usual hum of activity in the air seemed subdued, as if the very walls themselves carried a hidden weight. There was an unsettling silence among the usual clatter of dishes, and Van Dessel couldn't ignore it. The kitchen was filled with the usual bustle, yet it seemed strangely quiet. The sizzling of food, the clinking of plates, and the chatter of servers all felt muted, as though something was being kept out of sight. No one spoke loudly, and every movement seemed deliberate. It was as if the restaurant had become a different place overnight. The energy was off, like a wound that hadn't yet healed but was being kept covered, ignored. A soft, muffled sob reached Vin's ears, barely audible over the noise of the kitchen. He paused, sensing that something was wrong. The sound wasn't one of a typical busy night. It was a sound that didn't belong in the vibrant space he had worked hard to build. His instincts told him something deeper was at play. Without thinking, he followed the sound, moving toward the hallway near the kitchen. As he walked down the hallway, his gaze caught the sight of Amina standing near the break room. She was trying to hide the tears that ran down her face, but the tension was clear. Her back was turned and she stood with her shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to make herself smaller. She hadn't noticed him yet, but the vulnerability she tried so hard to keep hidden was impossible to ignore. Vin's heart sank. This wasn't just a moment of stress. This was something deeper, something that had been festering. He stepped closer, each step calculated. His presence didn't seem to affect her, though the tension in the air thickened. He knew something was wrong, and Amina's quiet sobs only confirmed it. She had always been a bright, energetic soul, always willing to help. To see her like this, broken and hiding her pain, set off alarms in Vin's mind. He couldn't let this go unnoticed. The realization hit him hard. He had built this place, this community of workers who relied on each other. He could feel it in his bones. Amina wasn't the only one feeling this way. He was certain now that something much larger was at play, something that needed to be uncovered. He knew he couldn't act hastily, though. If he wanted answers, he had to approach this carefully. One wrong move, and the whole foundation of trust he had worked so hard to build could crumble. As he watched her, the unease in his chest grew. He couldn't shake the question. What was causing Amina's distress? Why would she, a usually cheerful and hard-working employee, fall into such a state? He glanced around, noticing the employees who moved with unease, avoiding eye contact. Why was no one speaking up? The air was heavy with something unspoken. He had to find the answers quickly, or else the problem might grow, swallowing the restaurant whole before he even knew what was happening. The truth was just beyond his reach, and Vin knew he had to dig deeper before it was too late. Van Dessel walked through the restaurant, moving from one end to the other, ensuring everything was running smoothly. He checked in with his staff, giving each of them a nod or a word of encouragement. His eyes scanned the kitchen, the dining area, and the bar, always on the lookout for any signs of trouble. His mind was always on the business, but more importantly on the people who worked for him. He had built this place from the ground up, and the employees were like family to him. Vin had always led by example, staying close to the ground, ensuring his high standards were met. Nothing slipped by him without notice. But recently something had changed. Amina, the young waitress who had always been the bright spark of the team, was no longer the same. Her usual cheerfulness had been replaced with silence. She walked through the restaurant, her eyes downcast, a faraway look in them. The smile that used to be a constant fixture on her face had vanished. Her colleagues noticed her change, but no one dared to speak up. Whispers circulated, but no one had the courage to confront the issue directly. Amina, once full of life, now seemed to carry a weight that no one could understand. The light she once brought to the place was gone, and in its place was an unsettling stillness. Then came Kofi, the new manager. His arrival was meant to bring structure, to tighten things up, but what he brought instead was an air of control, a suffocating presence that seemed to suppress everything good about the place. His gaze was sharp, always watching, always calculating. He moved through the restaurant like a shadow, constantly monitoring, correcting, and criticizing. There was no room for warmth or creativity under his rule, only rules and commands. The restaurant, which had once felt like a family, now felt like a machine. Some employees feared him, others felt uncertain about his intentions. No one seemed to know what to make of him, but everyone felt the tension that followed him wherever he went. Kwame, a fellow server, noticed the changes too. He could sense that something wasn't right. He watched Amina more closely, noticing how she now avoided the kitchen, avoided speaking with others, and always seemed to be in a hurry to get away from the floor. It made his stomach churn with unease. He had worked with Amina for a long time and knew her well. This wasn't the Amina he knew. Something was wrong, but Kwame was unsure of how to address it. The oppressive atmosphere that Kofi had created made him hesitant to speak up. Who could he trust? Was it even safe to speak? Fear gripped him, and the more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. He couldn't ignore the growing tension that surrounded him and his colleagues, but the fear of making the wrong move kept him silent. Zara, the cook in the kitchen, also felt the strain. She could see how Kofi treated Amina, how he expected perfection from everyone but never offered support. Zara had always been observant, and what she saw disturbed her, but like Kwame, she kept her concerns to herself. The fear of retaliation was real. Kofi had a way of turning small mistakes into grand punishments. She had seen it happen before with others. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was happening behind the scenes. But speaking up seemed like an impossible risk, so she continued in silence, hoping for a change but knowing she couldn't make it happen alone. Vin continued to observe his restaurant from a distance, sensing the undercurrent of tension in the air. It wasn't just the silence, it was in the way the staff moved, in the way conversations seemed hushed, in the way no one dared to speak too loudly. Employees scurried to avoid Kofi's watchful eye, no longer engaging in the lively chatter. That once filled the restaurant. The atmosphere had shifted, and the warmth that had once made his place a welcoming environment was now gone. It was replaced by something cold, something stifling. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew something wasn't right. The feeling of unease lingered in the corners, and it was growing stronger. Vin resolved to find out what was really happening. Something was wrong, and if he didn't uncover the truth soon, it might destroy everything he had worked so hard to build. His eyes turned to Amina once again. The more he observed her, the more he realized that her behavior wasn't just a passing phase. There was something deeply troubling about the way she now moved through the restaurant. She had always been quiet and reserved at times, but this was different. It was as if a part of her had been taken away, leaving only a shell of the person she used to be. Vin couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening to Amina was linked to the changes Kofi had brought. It didn't take long for him to make up his mind. He had to uncover the truth. Whatever was behind Amina's distress, he knew. It was connected to the growing shadow that Kofi had cast over the restaurant, and Vin was determined to get to the bottom of it before it was too late. Vin watched closely, his eyes narrowing as he observed the new manager. Kofi, with his sharp commands and cold gaze, moved through the restaurant like a hawk circling its prey. His presence alone made the staff uneasy, and everyone seemed to avoid his gaze, moving with nervous energy, careful not to make a mistake. The usual chatter, the easy smiles and the laughter, had been replaced by a tense silence that hung heavy in the air. No one dared to question Kofi, and that was exactly what troubled Vin. Something was off, but no one was speaking about it. The tension was palpable, and Vin couldn't ignore it any longer. Vin's attention turned to Amina, the young waitress who had always been the heart of the restaurant. She had always been cheerful, always quick with a smile, but tonight she moved through the restaurant with a stiff, distant air. Her usual energy was gone, replaced by something darker, a quiet sadness that Vin could see in the way she held herself. She tried to hide it, pretending everything was fine, but Vin could tell. The warmth that had once radiated from her was now dimmed, and it troubled him deeply. He knew something was troubling her, but what? He decided he would have to find out for himself. He approached Kwame, hoping to gain some insight. "Is everything okay with Amina?" Vin asked, his voice low. Kwame hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously. The unease between them grew as Kwame shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, she's different. Keeps to herself now. She's been like this for a while." But when Vin pressed him further, the words died in Kwame's throat. The staff was reluctant to speak, exchanging uneasy glances, but saying nothing. Fear of reprisal was strong, and the silence in the restaurant felt like a tightening knot. Vin knew that if he wanted answers, he would have to listen more closely. He stepped back, observing Amina and Kwame, waiting for a moment when they would be alone. As the evening wore on, Vin's patience paid off. He overheard Amina speaking softly, with Kwame, her voice tinged with fear. "If I don't stay late, if I don't do what he says, I'll lose my job," Amina confided, her voice trembling. "He's been pressuring me, telling me it's the only way." Kwame's response was hushed, but Vin could hear the worry in his words. "You don't have to do what he says, Amina. He doesn't own you." But Amina's voice, barely a whisper, responded, "What choice do I have? If I say no, he'll ruin me." The words hit Vin like a thunderclap. The truth was now clear. Kofi had been manipulating and exploiting Amina for months. The power he held over her was not just about managing a restaurant. It was about control, fear, and abuse. The weight of Amina's words sank deep into Vin's chest. This was far worse than he had imagined. Kofi had taken his position and turned it into something toxic, something dangerous. Vin's anger swelled as he realized what had been happening under his nose. He had worked hard to build a place of trust and community, but Kofi had poisoned it, turning the restaurant into a place where fear thrived. The realization of what had been happening made Vin's blood run cold. He could no longer ignore it. He had to confront Kofi. He knew that it wasn't just about bad management. It was about protecting his people, his family. Determined to act, Vin prepared himself for the confrontation. His heart pounded as he rehearsed what he would say. He knew this would not be easy. Kofi was no ordinary manager. He was manipulative, smooth, and used to getting his way. But Vin was resolute. The safety of his employees, their well-being, depended on this moment. He couldn't allow Kofi to continue with his reign of fear. Vin took a deep breath and made his way to Kofi's office, every step filled with purpose. The confrontation was inevitable, and when Vin entered the office, the tension between the two men was immediate. Kofi, with his usual calm demeanor, tried to laugh it off, claiming he had been doing his job. "I'm just maintaining high standards," Kofi said smoothly, but Vin could hear the crack in his voice, the nervousness hiding beneath the surface. The more Kofi spoke, the more his dismissive attitude fueled Vin's anger. "You're not maintaining standards, Kofi. You're abusing your power," Vin shot back, his voice firm. "This stops now." Kofi tried to defend himself, twisting the truth, and turning the conversation back onto Vin, but Vin wouldn't be swayed. His resolve was clear. The restaurant, his restaurant, would not tolerate Kofi's behavior any longer. The power struggle between them intensified. Kofi's icy composure began to crack as Vin's words cut deeper. Kofi's attempts to manipulate the situation, to turn the tables, only fueled the fire inside Vin. He realized this wasn't just about a bad manager. This was about a man who had intentionally built a toxic environment, using his position to break people. Kofi's power came from fear, but Vin's power came from the truth, and he would not let Kofi twist it any longer. The confrontation was only the beginning of the struggle for control, but Vin was determined. He would win this battle. Kofi continued to deny everything, his irritation growing with each passing minute. His eyes narrowed as he tried to twist the truth, claiming that his actions had been misunderstood. But Vin wasn't fooled. "This isn't about misunderstandings, Kofi," Vin said, his voice low but steady. "This is about manipulation. This is about fear." Kofi's face twisted in frustration, and his tone grew sharp as he tried to turn the employees against Vin, threatening to ruin their lives if they sided with him. But Vin remained unmoved. The confrontation was now at a boiling point, and it was clear. Kofi's true nature was being revealed. What started as a power struggle over a restaurant had grown into something far more dangerous. Vin understood that now. This wasn't just a battle for control over a business. It was a fight for the safety and dignity of everyone who worked there. Vin entered the restaurant quietly, blending in with the usual crowd of customers. He took a seat in the corner, watching his staff from a new perspective. His eyes moved across the room, observing the usual hustle and bustle. But something felt off. The tension in the air was thick. As he listened carefully to the conversations around him, his attention fixed on Amina. She passed by, her smile absent, her movements slower than usual. Something about her behavior caught his eye, and a sense of unease stirred within him. As the evening unfolded, Vin's heart raced. He was getting closer to the truth, and the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Vin overheard Amina speaking in a hushed voice, just out of sight. Her words, soft but shaky, pierced through the noise. "If I don't stay late, if I don't do what he says, I'll lose my job." Amina's voice trembled as she continued. "He tells me it's the only way. I don't know what else to do." The air grew heavier as her confession unfolded. She was trapped, manipulated into tolerating things that no one should have to endure. The truth hit Vin hard. Kofi had been using his position to control Amina, pressuring her into submission with threats. The clarity of the moment was sobering. Vin's resolve solidified. He had to act. Watching closely, Vin saw the conversation continue, his worst fears confirmed. Kofi's behavior was not just that of a controlling manager. It was something darker, more sinister. The manipulation was clear. Amina stood there looking small, her words barely escaping her lips as she tried to stand her ground. Kofi's sharp, dismissive tone cut through her like a knife. The power imbalance was undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. It was abuse. With the evidence now in his mind, Vin knew there was no turning back. The truth could no longer be ignored. Vin walked directly to Kofi's office, his mind made up. His steps were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of the responsibility he now bore. The door closed behind him with a soft click. With calm precision, Vin placed the recordings on the desk. "This ends now," he said, his voice steady. Kofi, ever the manipulator, tried to laugh it off. He claimed that his methods were necessary to maintain standards, that his actions were misunderstood. But Vin stood firm. The evidence was clear. "You've used your position to harm people," Vin said sharply. "This will not stand." Kofi's arrogant smirk faltered, but he tried to talk his way out, twisting the situation to his advantage. But Vin wasn't moved. The time for excuses was over. Vin dialed corporate HR, his voice unwavering, as he informed them that Kofi's actions would not be tolerated. "He's done," Vin said, sealing Kofi's fate. The moment Kofi was escorted out of the restaurant, the shift in power was immediate. The employees, who had been too afraid to speak out, now watched with wide eyes. They saw the direct result of standing up to injustice. The air lightened as the fear that had gripped the staff for so long began to lift. Vin stood tall before them, his voice strong as he assured them that the restaurant would now be a place of respect and transparency. The oppressive atmosphere that had haunted them was gone, and in its place, hope began to take root. The employees, once silent and fearful, felt the stirrings of empowerment. The change had begun. With Kofi gone, the change in the restaurant was undeniable. Vin spoke to his staff, his words filled with conviction. This was the beginning of a new chapter. Trust, respect, and accountability would guide the way forward. He promised that no one would ever be made to feel unsafe or undervalued again. Amina, once burdened by the weight of fear, looked at Vin with gratitude. The heavy weight of the past few months seemed to lift from her shoulders. Around her, the other employees nodded in agreement, their confidence growing. The restaurant, once overshadowed by fear and control, now stood as a place where integrity and respect would lead the way. It was a new beginning for all of them, and they would move forward together, stronger than before. After Kofi's departure, Vin knew the real work had just begun. He moved through the restaurant with a new purpose, checking in with each employee, listening to their concerns, and reassuring them that the dark days were over. He asked simple questions, but the weight of the words behind them was clear. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his eyes steady on each worker. Slowly, Amina approached him. She had been silent for so long, carrying a burden that no one had seen. Finally, she opened up, her voice trembling as she explained the toll Kofi's behavior had taken on her. "I didn't know who I could turn to," she whispered. Vin nodded, acknowledging her pain. "You're safe now," he reassured her. "Things will change." The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The heavy weight of fear seemed to lift from the shoulders of the staff. They began to breathe easier, as if they had been holding their breath for too long. With Kofi gone, Amina felt the chains that had bound her spirit for so long finally loosen. She stood in front of the staff during their next meeting, her voice no longer trembling but strong and clear. "I've been through a lot," she began, her eyes meeting the gazes of those around her. "But I'm speaking now, because I know that we deserve better. We deserve a place where we feel safe, respected." Her words hung in the air, stirring something in the hearts of her co-workers. The others began to speak too, sharing their own fears, their own frustrations. They had been silent for too long, but now they knew that their voices mattered. Vin listened patiently, giving each of them the space to speak, showing them that honesty was the key to building something stronger. The courage Amina displayed sparked something in the others. They began to understand that this was no longer just about the work. They were a community, and they could only grow if they supported each other. Vin knew that the road to healing would take time, but he was committed to making the restaurant a place where everyone felt valued. He called a meeting with all the employees, standing before them with the same strength and clarity that had guided him through the toughest moments. "We are going to build a new culture here," he said, his voice firm and steady. "A culture of openness, respect, and integrity." He emphasized that no one should ever feel unsafe or unsupported again. "If we are to succeed," Vin continued, "it must be because we hold each other accountable and respect one another. Toxic behavior, like what we've seen in the past, will never be tolerated again." The words seemed to ignite something in the room, a sense of pride and unity. They were no longer just co-workers. They were partners in creating a space of fairness, one that would reflect the values they now held dear. As the weeks passed, the changes in the restaurant were undeniable. Vin took the time to meet with key staff members individually, ensuring they felt supported, heard, and valued. He spoke with Kwame and Zara, acknowledging the pain of the past, but emphasizing that the future was built on trust. "We move forward together," Vin said, his eyes meeting theirs. "The success of this place depends on all of us. We have to work as one, speak up when we face challenges, and never shy away from doing the right thing." The staff began to heal, slowly but surely. The restaurant transformed into a place where employees communicated openly, worked together, and cared for one another. It was no longer a place of fear. It had become a true community, one where everyone's voice was heard and respected. With the oppressive atmosphere gone, the restaurant began to thrive. Amina, now empowered, took on new responsibilities. Her confidence grew, and as she flourished, so did the others. They were no longer intimidated by the heavy hand that had once controlled them. Vin continued to lead with strength and integrity, holding regular meetings to ensure the new culture stayed strong. The staff embraced the changes, working together in ways they never had before. Creativity blossomed in the kitchen, teamwork flourished on the floor, and the once silent employees now spoke freely, sharing ideas and suggestions. Customers began to notice the difference too. The energy in the restaurant was lighter, more inviting, and the business flourished as a result of the positive changes. As the weeks went by, the bond between the staff grew stronger. Trust was no longer just an idea, it was a lived experience. Vin worked closely with each employee, offering support and guidance, ensuring they had the tools to succeed and grow. The restaurant, once filled with fear, had become a place of growth where every person was valued, respected, and empowered. Amina continued to rise, confident in her role and her place within the team. The other staff members opened up about their own struggles, knowing that they had a leader who genuinely cared. "We're not just here to make a living," Vin said, his voice filled with pride. "We're here to make a difference, and that starts with how we treat each other." The restaurant became more than just a business. It became a beacon of change, a place where fairness, transparency, and respect ruled. The employees worked together like a family, and the customers could feel the difference. What had once been a place of tension and fear was now a symbol of hope and strength. As the last of the employees filed out, Vin stood by the door, quietly watching the scene. The night, once filled with heavy tension, was now light. The workers, no longer burdened by fear, laughed together as they left, their voices filled with relief. The change was palpable, and Vin felt a deep sense of pride. The journey had been hard, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had begun to heal. For the first time in a long while, the staff seemed at ease. Vin took in the sight, knowing that this moment, though small, was a victory for the people he had fought so hard to protect. Standing alone, Vin reflected on the long path that had led him to this moment. Leadership, he realized, was not about the profits or the reports that came in at the end of each month. It was about the people. He thought of the times when he allowed others to misuse their power, when he didn't see the cracks in the foundation, until it was almost too late. He thought about the betrayal of trust by Kofi and the impact it had on his employees. The weight of that loss was heavy. In that moment of silence, Vin understood something deep within his heart. True leadership is always about putting people first. He promised himself that moving forward, he would always choose his employees' well-being over any number. Vin's thoughts shifted to the abuse of power, and his stomach twisted with the memory of how Kofi had manipulated everyone around him. He remembered the fear, the nervous glances, the quiet voices. Power, when it is misused, can break spirits, leaving people too afraid to speak, too afraid to act. Vin understood now how easy it is to turn a blind eye to someone in power, how it's so simple to ignore the damage they cause because they speak the loudest. He felt guilty, knowing that he hadn't recognized the signs of manipulation earlier. Yet there was a sense of gratitude in him as well. This was his opportunity to correct his course, to make sure that something like this never happened again. Kofi's removal had been the right choice, but it also had given Vin the lesson he needed. A place where fear rules has no room for success. The restaurant, his restaurant, would now thrive only on fairness and respect. Vin watched the empty restaurant, the quiet now feeling different. His mind raced with the knowledge that the work was far from over. He made a promise to himself. No longer would the restaurant operate in the shadow of fear. The weight of manipulation would never darken these walls again. From this point on, the restaurant would be a place where honesty and integrity would reign. Vin knew leadership was about making the tough decisions, even if they came at a personal cost. He would continue to build a space where every worker could thrive, free from fear or retaliation. He had learned a difficult lesson, but it was one he would carry forward, shaping every decision with fairness and respect for all. The next day, Vin gathered the staff together for a meeting. He stood before them, his voice calm but powerful. "We are here because we made a choice to do better," he began. "No matter what happened before, from now on, we must stand for what is right no matter the cost. Leadership is not just about making money or managing a business. It's about doing what is just." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We've seen the damage that unchecked power can do, but now we have the courage to speak up, to stand against what is wrong, and to make this a place where everyone is treated with respect." The room was silent, the words hanging in the air. Vin's eyes moved over each face, seeing their realization, their understanding. They were ready. They could see the way forward. Vin closed the meeting with one final thought. True leadership means making the hard decisions that benefit the team, not just the individual. Standing up for what's right is never easy. It may be uncomfortable, but it is always worth it. When we speak out against injustice, we change the world around us. The staff was quiet, each person reflecting on the message that had been shared. They could feel the power of those words, knowing that they were no longer working in fear but in a space where their voices could be heard. The atmosphere had changed. No longer were they just employees. They were part of something bigger. They now stood united in integrity, in courage, and in the respect they had long deserved. As Vin looked around, he knew the journey had just begun. He was committed to making this restaurant a place where every person could grow, where their dignity was not only protected but celebrated. The lesson had been learned. Leadership isn't about control. It's about creating a space where everyone can stand tall, speak their truth, and work together. The future of the restaurant was now grounded in honesty, fairness, and mutual respect. And for the first time in a long while, Vin saw the hope in his employees' eyes. They were ready to move forward, together.